finally it just came out with the title SPQR, and that became, as I intended from the first, the title of the whole series.
You're the only person in my inventory program whose books are SPQR, Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, whatever, you know, because I think it sort of sticks with that. What's the name of your character?
His name is Decius Caecilius Metellus.
I didn't want to try to pronounce it and embarrass myself. It's Decius, huh?
Yeah, it's Decius. Actually, in classical Latin, it would probably be something like Decius, but I say Decius just like everybody else.
Okay.
I grew up on Church Latin, where the C is soft like it is, and it can be, at least in modern English. So I don't pay much attention to the classical Ciceronian Latin pronunciation, much of which is just guesswork anyway. But he's, in the early books, he's a low-ranking member of a very high-ranking family. He's the Caecilius Metellus clan is historical. They were one of the most powerful families of that period, and this was a period when several families were all clawing and fighting for power in the last days of the Roman Republic.
Right, and as a result, they dominated the Senate, right?
Yes, and his particular family was extremely numerous. So there were a lot of members of the Senate. They controlled a big voting bloc in the Senate, and also in the popular assemblies. The Metellus family, Caecilius Metellus family, were plebeians. They weren't patricians, which meant that some of their members could be tribunes of the people, which was in many ways the most powerful office at that time. And they could push legislation through the plebeian assemblies. The plebeian assemblies made the laws, and the Senate pretty much handled foreign policy and warfare, things like that. So the Caecilius Metellus family, being very prominent in both bodies, pretty much had the politics of the era sewed up. But there were other rivals too.
One of the things I like about it is his career path, because here he is, this kind of junior member of the clan, and you have him moving through, it seems to be a pretty strict progression of office, and a chain eventually designed to end where with him? What's the highest rank he can achieve?
The highest rank he can achieve is, short of dictator, is consul, but he never gets pretty much the republic pretty much ends before he gets a chance. Well, the office of consul remained, but it became pretty much
honorary.
The guy that Caesar appointed to be consul, and he doesn't go with that. The highest rank he will actually hold is the one that he's held in the last couple of novels, which is praetor, magistrate, senior magistrate.
And you've got him actually as Peter Peregrinus. Grinus,
yeah.
Which is it?
Peregrinus, I think it is.
Right.
I say Peregrinus, but he's the judge who handles cases that involve foreigners, which is where Peregrinus comes from. Also, the word we get pilgrim.
Or peregrinate, isn't there such an English word? Walking around?
Yeah, traveling around. So he travels around Italy and handles cases that involve foreigners.
Which is cool for you as a mystery writer.
It lets me get out of Rome and do some other things. It lets him visit. That's why I've had more than one book set in that particular year. But yes, there's a progression of offices. You had to be a certain age before you could hold each office, and then once you had the offices that had imperium, which is the power to command armies and so forth. Then your year in office in Italy was followed by a year at least of being a governor out in the provinces someplace.
That's where the money lay.
That's where you had your chance to get rich. Roman politicians served at they weren't paid. They served at their own expense, and that meant they provided their own staff, everything. If Decius is traveling around, he's got his own investigators. He has to pay them.
And didn't they have to sponsor their own games and even their own triumphs?
Yeah, their year as aedile, which essentially was sort of city manager, in charge of the upkeep of the streets and the bridges and all the infrastructure. There was an allowance given by the Senate, but it hadn't changed in several hundred years, so it was practically nothing. So you had to, if you were going to have games, you had to pretty much do it with your own money. And these people went way into debt to put on spectacular games. Julius Caesar just went legendarily into debt during his year as aedile to put on the most spectacular games everything. But that guaranteed your election to higher office. And in the higher offices, then you could go out in the provinces and get rich and pay back your creditors, and then finance the rest of your political career.
It's kind of embarrassingly like what goes on today, isn't it?
Yeah, needless to say, it led to tremendous corruption.
You bet.
They essentially went out to the provinces to plunder. when Augustus came to power, that was one of the first things he reformed, was how and who got sent out to the provinces, and he kept an eye on them. And the worst in the later Roman Empire, the worst excesses were created under the bad emperors, not because the emperors were doing it themselves, but because they weren't paying attention to business and just sent their cronies out to the provinces to govern. And then you had rebellions like Boudicca's in England under Nero and so forth. The better emperors kept tight rein on all their provincial governors, so most of the time government was pretty good compared to how bad it could have been.
I think the Romans were unbelievably good as administrators. They were very pragmatic people. I mean, they were great engineers. They were, you know, a lot of things.
And they were also completely convinced that everybody else was better off under their rule than under local native rule. They had no doubt at all about their superiority as governors and administrators, and for pretty good reason, too.
Well, they were largely right for their time, no question about it. He also, your guy, Decius, has had, at least towards the end here, he's married to a relative of Caesar, right?
Yes, he's married to a
Julia?
niece, Julia. Of course, all the women of that family were named Julia, but he's married to this particular Julia. Luckily, there are very few Caesars, so there's not much confusion within the family.
All right, why did you decide to ally him with Caesar through marriage?
Well, there are several reasons. One, to get him closer to Caesar, which is where a lot of important and interesting things were happening. Also, it gives him some, in later years, it gives him some protection, because as his own family falls from power, because they picked the wrong side during the civil wars, what essentially is keeping him alive is that he's married to a Caesar, and it was Caesar's, after his assassination, it was his family under Augustus, and then the rest of them that came to power, rather than the families of Brutus and Cassius and those that had conspired against Caesar.
So your hero has essentially chosen the right side, even if it happens to be matrimonially.
Yeah, and he stayed out of the civil wars when his family went to. This I haven't written about yet, although it'll, at least not in the ones that are available in the States yet. After the book that just came out,
which is number 12 right here,
number
Oracle
12,
of the
yes.
Dead.
Yes, the next book skips ahead several years. It's out in Germany now, entitled The Year of Confusion, and this takes place during Julius Caesar's dictatorship. And Decius's family has been pretty much destroyed. He's one of the last remaining members of it, but because he's married to Caesar's niece, he's essentially he considers himself an errand boy for Caesar during Caesar's dictatorship.
Every once in a while in these books, you have him speak as an old man looking back, and you give us some tantalizing thing. I mean, we know that he outlives Julia, for example, because he misses her at some point. And I think this book ends with a statement about it was the last year of, what was it, the last year of the Republic? Is that how?
Yeah, because this book ends just before Caesar crosses the Rubicon and sets off the Civil War, and essentially the Republic, although it wasn't really noticeable at the time, the Republic was pretty much dead from that moment on. Then it was Caesar's dictatorship, and then Augustus took over, well, as Octavian.
Right. Well, those of us who watched I, Claudius, or actually, you know, Stephen Saylor's been writing a long-running series, kind of winding through this time frame too. Now, he calls that Roman sub rosa. What does that mean?
That was a Roman expression, under the rose, and it meant this is just between you and me, essentially. This is strictly sub rosa. You know, nobody else is supposed to hear about this. How exactly they came up with that term, I'm not entirely sure.
Well, I didn't know if the rose itself had any special significance, like the Tudor rose, or you know.
Well, most natural things did in the ancient world. Almost every plant was sacred to some god or other, and so it just sort of took on the characteristics of that god. But I write the series as if written. Decius is a very old man. He's in his 90s, writing about midway through the reign of Augustus, and he's writing his memoirs,
right?
Because he's virtually the last man in Rome who remembers a lot of these people face to face, and took part in the events of that day. And I did this, you know, one major reason, of course, for one thing, it's been done before, and things like I, Claudius, or George MacDonald Fraser's Flashman books,